If I wanted to be good at something, this is what it takes. And it's a lot of sacrifice. What's up?
What's up, Carlo?
How's it going?
What's going on?
Yeah, we got a podcast today. So I guess the question is, why did I even start a podcast to begin with? In this video, I'm going to be kind of just talking about how I started this podcast, how I created it, where it is right now, and throughout this video, you're going to see a behind the scenes of the making of an in-person podcast. I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. My plan A is my plan B through Z on every single thing I do. Growing as a person, going through life is mostly done through personal experience, positive and negative. You have to be the one to fail. You have to be the one that goes through hardships. But at the same time, you also have to be the one to feel success. You have to feel like you're doing something good. There's balance. Something that I also think is equally as important is humbling yourself enough to listen to other people's personal experiences, their stories, their failures, and their successes. I love the idea of being a constant student, a never-ending student, someone that always wants to continue to learn and never feels like they have all the answers, because at the end of the day, I don't know everything. I barely know anything at all. So being able to listen to other people only broadens my life experience and my knowledge and my wisdom to be able to pass on to other people. I love podcasts. I listen to them regularly, probably more than music half the time. And when I first started the podcast, I don't know if I realized how difficult it really was to be a good host. I think the hardest thing for me that I'm still working through and trying to become a great host is the balance between an interviewer and a conversation. Because you want to steer the conversation in a way of question answer, because you want to create a path for the conversation. But at the same time, you don't want it to be a very structured, at least I don't with my show. I want it to be more conversation based, but with topics that have meaning and has a start, middle, and end. For me, trying to find that balance has been really difficult, but I think I'm starting to get the hang of it and I'm starting to get a lot better at it. Being totally present, listening, and then trying to come back and ask a question, or sometimes I get too lost in what is that next question that I forget that I'm actually listening to what they're saying. So if trying to find that balance of being present and being ready for the next question is also a really tough challenge that I've started to overcome. I've seen some that have done this. It's not the word.
Is this too close? No, this is good.
I think it's not
pretty
pretty
nice.
easy.
I think it's fun.
Yeah.
As long as you're comfortable, I feel like.
How do you feel about doing it on the couch next to each other?
Whatever you think is
Chill?
Yeah. I'm cool with it. I also have a bunch of chairs too, so.
Beach chairs?
A lawn chair.
Bruh.
Yeah, whatever you want, bro.
A table too. So this is my mobile podcast setup. It's my camera stuff, two FX3, FX30. I got a Fuji X100V and like a other Sony thing. I don't even know. And then these are the microphone stands, two pod mics, two tripods, headphones, Polaroid for pictures.
Nice.
Have to have in all my cables are in here, so really tried fitting it to be like the most optimal mobile setup. I think it's coming along pretty well actually, so I'm pretty stoked about it.
What made you decide to do the podcast?
Honestly, being on set so much, I'm usually like one of the youngest people on set, especially with like the grips and everything. They're usually a lot older, they're fathers, husbands. So having like them just give me insight into life and film and the industry and work, I felt was just so valuable, and I didn't want to be the only person to take advantage of like these people's, insight. So that's kind of what made me start. It was just learning from the people that I work with. So when I first started this podcast, I was doing it completely virtual. I had no intention of really doing it in person, only because my network of people that I know isn't really in my surrounding area. I know people all over the country, I know people all over the world, and I figured if I want to speak to all these people, the best way to do it is virtually. And I tried a bunch of different hosting platforms, and, no shade to any of them. They really did work, and they got me up to 24 episodes or so. And I really do think that there are some great conversations in there, and that some of those episodes are really phenomenal. But I always felt that there was a disconnect from me and the guest. There was always like a second delay, and there was always this human connection that I was missing. I was doing virtual until I went on a trip. I went to Texas with Music Bed, and I did my first in-person podcast with Edward Lee. He also has a podcast called Mid Convo. How he structured his podcast really opened my eyes to see the potential and the possibility of being able to do it. And after doing that podcast with him, I realized that there is an element of doing this podcast virtually that you are completely missing when you're doing it in person. I'm able to see the person's mannerisms. I'm able to see their emotions better. I'm able to see their physical, what they're doing with their hands, their movements, all things to be able to read the energy and the vibe of what that person is feeling. And I think those are really important to think about when you're talking to someone, having a conversation or doing an interview, is reading people, reading their body language to be able to better inform the conversation. In these 4 episodes that I've done in person, they've all been at different locations, and doing podcasts at different locations presents its own challenges, and maybe one day I'll have my own studio, but there is a challenge aspect that I really do enjoy. Again, most of you know me as a cinematographer. I've gone to locations hundreds of times where I don't know where I'm going to be shooting, I don't know the composition, but I just have to figure it out on the day, figure it out really quickly, and make it the best possible composition as I can. And it goes the same thing with this podcast. I feel that same type of challenge, and I feel that same type of questioning when I walk into the set, like, all right, where is the best looking frame? I'm truly just at the mercy of what that location has to offer, which I also think is a beautiful thing as well.
I know you usually have like themes with each podcast you do. Do you have a specific theme for this?
Theme?
Yeah.
Just want to learn more about him, see what his process is like, and, learn a little bit more about his life. Yeah, I think some of the best podcasts are like when people are like asking questions back and forth.
All right, so let's talk some technical aspects of how I'm able to do this in-person podcast. So since this is a video podcast as well as audio, I have to use 2 cameras, and what I'm using are the Sony FX3 and the Sony FX30. I'm pairing those with the Sony 24-70 and the Sony 50mm lens. And obviously those aren't the cheapest cameras and lenses out there. They're obviously not the most expensive either. These cameras, I feel, are perfect for me for what I have to do with the podcast in terms of quality, but also they serve other purposes and other side of my business as well in DP work and YouTube, so they're multi-purpose for me. But in terms of quality, these are absolutely beautiful cameras that deliver 4K images. The color is amazing, and autofocus is, you can't beat Sony autofocus. But I will say though, don't get discouraged for those of you that want to start an in-person podcast, especially video, that you don't have the top-notch cameras. It's okay to be able to start with something a little bit smaller and work your way up. Use that as motivation to grow your podcast and be able to get the equipment that you want. I think there is something to starting off small, starting off rugged, and being able to, get through that phase of your business to be able to get to the place where you got the equipment that you want, you have the look that you want, and you have the quality that you want, but only due to you persevering and going through the tough stage, the small stages of your business. Next thing we're going to be talking about is audio, which is the most important. For the microphones, I'm using the Rode Pod mics, which are dynamic microphones. Dynamic microphones are a little bit less sensitive than other microphones, so you have to be a lot closer to the microphone itself to be able to have a great quality audio feed. And that is great for podcasting because you want to be close to the mic and you want to have clear audio. I'll also say that these Rode Pod mics are really great for the price. They're about $100, and for that price, which is fairly affordable, you can get some really clean and really great audio from it. So to hold the mics up, I have 2 boom stands that extend, and they're great because you could vary the height depending on how high or low the chairs are, the table, and they're hands-free, so you can feel free to move your hands throughout the podcast. And for me, they just allow a lot of freedom, and they're really strong. They're great. They're pretty affordable, and they offer a lot of flexibility, again, depending on how you're setting up the individual podcast. The next piece of equipment that I truly recommend that you don't cheap out on is good XLR cables. XLR cables are what go from the mic to the mixer or the recorder. And you want to make sure that you have really good quality cables to be able to record the best quality audio you can. So to be able to record your audio, you need a mixer or a recorder. I'm using the Rodecaster Pro mixer, and this is a 4-channel podcast mixer specifically. And the reason why I'm using this one is because it does offer 4 channels. It has a lot of customization and flexibility to suit your specific podcast. And I love the workflow, and it has an SD card built in, so you're able to record directly into the mixer. It has a USB-C out that can go into your computer. And I truly just love the aesthetic of it as well. And for me, I love quality things. I really do. And for me, whenever I do something, whether it's YouTube, podcast, or TP work, I always have to hold myself to a certain standard. And I think that having this mixer allows me to set myself apart and be able to present myself to the guest, as this is a serious podcast. So in terms of recording the audio, the SD card built into the Rodecaster records internally, and then I have a USB-C out to my computer that's running Ableton Live, which is an audio recording software or an audio editing software. And I have a 2-track running there, individual audio tracks. So my track, the guest track, recording internally to my computer. So both tracks running, the computer and the Rodecaster Pro as backup and redundancy. The next really important aspect to making a good video podcast is lighting. And for this one in particular that we're showing today, I used what the studio had to offer. One was an Aperture 600, the other was an Amaron 200X, both going through big softboxes with grids for control. And the reason why I use softboxes is to get the most soft light possible. You don't want to use hard light directly on someone's face. It's going to be very unflattering. The shadows are going to be pretty wild. Regardless of what light you have, the key is always just try to make it as soft as you possibly can to get the most flattering looking image. In other instances where the studio or the home or the place may not have equipment to use, I'll bring my own lighting kit. And it's a fairly simple kit. I'll bring 2 Nanlite Pavo tubes, my pool noodles, and a Nanlite Forza 500B. And the reason why I have that as my kit is it's fairly simple. The 2 tubes are used as my key lights for myself and the guest, cross-keying them. And the 500 is usually just in the background, bouncing off the ceiling to enhance the background ambient light. And it's really important for me to be able to have depth in my image. So not just lighting the subject, but lighting the background as well. So obviously, as you could see, doing in person is not the easiest thing in the world. It does require resources. It's expensive. There are expenses in doing that. And fortunately, I feel very grateful to be able to have the resources to be able to do it. But just know that if you want to do in person, do it at the scale that you're comfortable at. And like I said earlier, start there and use that as motivation to grow into the podcast of your dreams and what you want it to become. And I'm still doing that today. Obviously, I have some great equipment and I'm talking to some really great guests, but eventually I would love to have my own studio. I would love to have people and a team to be able to help me on this podcast. So I'm growing it, I'm still building it, but I'm using what I'm doing now as motivation to get me there. I'm not sure where the podcast is going to go. I'm not sure where it's going to be in a year from now, but I'm enjoying the journey. I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm enjoying doing it and finding new challenges to overcome within the podcast and growing this side of my business. And it's totally different than anything I've ever done. And I'm finding a lot of fulfillment in it. And it's truly fulfilling hearing that what I'm doing and what I'm sharing with the world, with other people's stories and their experiences are really benefiting other people and being able to resonate with them. And that's really what this is about for me, is being able to bring people onto the podcast and provide a platform for them to share their failures, their success, their strategies, their skills, and for people to listen and be able to resonate with that and take something away with it after they listen to the episode. So hopefully you found some value in this video. There are some of you that may not have any interest in starting a podcast, but you just wanted to see how I do mine, which is pretty cool. But if you want to start your own, I encourage you to do so. It's one of the most fulfilling things that I do currently, and I really enjoy it. But if you haven't already checked out my podcast, check out The Creative Gap. We're on all podcast platforms. We're on YouTube as well, where we show the whole video podcast. On Instagram, I share snippets and reels and images. And so if you haven't already checked it out, please do so. And if you're already listening to the podcast, I appreciate you checking it out and listening. Leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Let us know your thoughts on Instagram or message us how you're enjoying the podcast. So yeah, that's all I got for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Peace out.